Video, guys, I was going to cover Piers Karen Morgan and his complete hypocritical approach to practically everything he talks about. But this popped up and I felt it was more important, so Piers Karen Morgan can wait until later on, because there are reports out suggesting there could be a rift between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. As we all know, there was always a possibility of vipers being left in the Tory party that could well go against what the people of this country want, and it seems that might be what's happening, with possible plans to oust Boris Johnson and put Rishi Sunak in charge, simply because Boris Johnson and others in his cabinet want to limit the dealings with China, obviously due to what's been going on over the past few months. Rishi Sunak, maybe a few others, don't want that to happen, with apparently an MP claiming cracks are appearing, and Rishi Sunak may be pushed into the prime ministerial role quicker than anyone had thought. Now, before we get into the video, be sure to hit the subscribe button. YouTube tells me 60% of my viewers are not actually subscribed, so if you want to be notified when I upload a video, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Now, the Express article headlines, Tories at war. Boris and Rishi rift erupts over response to China. Cracks are growing. Boris Johnson's cabinet is said to be divided over his tough response to China following Beijing's latest actions, with one MP claiming cracks are appearing in the Prime Minister's relationship with Rishi Sunak, who is, I'm sure you all know, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, after Sajid Javid stepped down. The MP further suggested the highly regarded Chancellor tipped to replace the Prime Minister in number 10 sooner than expected. Mr Johnson and Mr Sunak are increasingly divided on the subject of China, with the former keen to take a tougher stance on Beijing and the latter wary of putting up an economic wall, fearing such a move would slow the UK's coronavirus recovery, the MP claimed. And while I don't agree with Rishi Sunak, he does have a point. Putting up a wall with China will of course hurt the economy, which is his job to prevent. But at the end of the day, given what has happened, and of course the worldwide reliance on China, resetting our relationship with them is definitely something that needs to happen. As I think you'll find is something a lot of countries are considering now. The Tory MP added, the sense among my colleagues is that Rishi is allowing more cracks to grow between him and Boris. Mr Sunak's standing within the party remains, and he is consistently one of the favourites to be Britain's next Prime Minister among bookmakers. The MP suggested that Rishi's time could come sooner than expected, which to me, guys, says there's already a plan to possibly oust Boris Johnson. Now, I don't know for sure, but it certainly is a possibility, especially with this unnamed Tory MP saying Rishi's time could come sooner than expected. We all knew there was a bunch of scheming snakes in the Conservative Party last year before some of them were purged, and we also knew that there was likely a hell of a lot more of them left inside, which, if this article is true, and remember, we are essentially getting an unnamed source here, then it would suggest that plenty of them still remain, and plots appear to be moving forward, possibly to get rid of Boris Johnson. Of course, it is also very likely that this is a complete load of horseshit. Remember, these are the tabloids we're talking about here. The divisions were laid bare during a meeting of the National Security Council on Tuesday, at which Mr Johnson outlined plans for a reset of relations with Beijing, which would limit the UK's economic dependence on the superpower, which is literally something every single Tory MP, Labour MP, and any MP for that matter should be singing as well, even if they don't like Boris Johnson. At the end of the day, given what has happened, it is a common sense approach to take. However, Mr Sunak is understood to have raised concerns about the approach. He and Business Secretary Alok Sharma made a forthright case for Chinese investment in industries such as steel and nuclear power. Oh, so nothing too important to the UK then. You can't just forget about the economic shit show that has happened in order to rescue the economy in future, because you just put us back in the same boat where something like this could put the country back in the shitter. On the other side, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, Home Secretary Priti Patel and Defence Secretary Ben Wallace backed the idea of taking a much tougher line on China. It's a shame they're not all taking a much tougher line on multiple things that are happening in this country, but I will say it's good that they're taking a tough line on that. Priti Patel, though, seriously needs to pick her game up, in my opinion. One source told the Mail Online the economic departments were obviously worried about their balance sheets and made that very clear. Richie was reading from the Treasury script that we are all doomed if we don't do as they say. Another said Mr Sunak had warned the UK could not afford to exclude the world's second largest economy. Mr Sunak, 39, has enjoyed a meteoric rise since he was elected as Tory MP for Richmond in Yorkshire in 2015. And just 5 years later, he is being touted as the next Prime Minister, with possibly a push to oust Boris Johnson and force him in. A backer of the Leave campaign a year later, he was appointed Parliament Under Secretary for Local Government by then Prime Minister Theresa May in January 2018. He backed Mr Johnson for the Tory leadership and was appointed Chief Secretary to the Treasury in July 2019, during which time he served under the then Chancellor Sajid Javid, as we already know. However, in February, following Mr Javid's shock resignation, he replaced him in number 11. His first budget took place on March 11th and included an announcement of 30 billion additional spending, with 12 billion specifically allocated to mitigating the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And that is something I would really love to know. Why did Sajid Javid resign when he did, just before the budget took place? And only days later, as it said here, before Rishi Sunak announced an extra 330 billion in emergency support for businesses, plus the furlough scheme for employees to prevent massive job losses, which by the looks of it hasn't really worked. Plenty of businesses have gone out of business and people have still lost their jobs. When Mr Johnson contracted coronavirus in April, a number 10 spokesman confirmed Mr Sunak would be next in line had Mr Raab also become incapacitated. The spokesman said there is an established order of precedence which is kind of obvious. The Prime Minister has appointed the Foreign Secretary as his first Secretary of State. In line with the order of precedence, the Chancellor would follow from the Foreign Secretary, which I'm sure is the same the world over to keep the governments running. Express.co.uk has contacted number 10 to ask about claims of a split between Mr Johnson and Mr Sunak, and they were never really going to answer that, let's be honest. Now, do I think this article is true? Probably not. Is it possible? 100% definitely. Anything like this is always possible. We've seen what the traitorous vipers are like within the Tory party, and obviously it goes without saying for politicians on the other side of the fence to them. There could very well be plans afoot to remove Boris Johnson and put Rishi Sunak in place. As to when that could happen, who actually knows? But if the Tory MP that this article is citing is right, then it could well be a lot sooner than we think. And by the way it was said, probably before the next election. Boris Pretty and the UK government has messed up quite a few things recently, but a tough stance on China is not one of them, if you ask me. You'll have to let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Now, as always, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel, and my other social media links are down in the video description if you want to come and support me on Twitter, BitChute, and a variety of other platforms, including my second YouTube channel. As I said, all links are down in the video description.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors, slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires, and that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going.